Jake Morrison sat on the cold metal bench outside the medical evaluation room. His hands were shaking as he held the paper that would decide his entire future. The words on it were simple and clear: rejected for active military service. Below that, in smaller letters, it said, neural interface incompatibility, permanent disqualification. He had spent his whole life dreaming of flying warships. Every kid on Earth grew up watching the space battles against the Krell Empire. The alien race had been at war with humanity for 20 years now, and they were winning. Earth needed every pilot they could get. But apparently they didn't need Jake. The problem was in his brain. Something about his neural pathways made it impossible for him to connect with the ship interface systems. Every modern warship used these systems. A pilot would plug their mind directly into the ship's computer, and they would become one with the vessel. Thoughts became actions in milliseconds. It was the only way humans could compete with Krell reaction speeds. Jake's biology rejected the interface. During his test run, the connection had failed completely. While other cadets were flying simulated missions with their minds, Jake had just sat there with a headache, unable to make the ship respond. The doctors ran test after test, but the result was always the same. His brain simply wouldn't work with the technology. "Hey, Jake." A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. Lisa Bennett stood in front of him, still wearing her pilot's uniform. She had passed her evaluation with perfect scores. In 3 days, she would ship out to the UES Valiant, one of Earth's newest battlecruisers. "Hey, Lisa." Jake tried to smile, but it felt fake on his face. She sat down next to him and looked at the rejection letter. "I heard. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, that's life, right?" Jake crumpled the paper and stood up. "The military doesn't need people like me. They need real pilots. That's garbage, and you know it." Lisa grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You scored higher than anyone else in tactical theory. Your simulation strategies were brilliant. The only thing you can't do is plug your brain into a computer, which is the only thing that matters in modern warfare." Jake pulled his arm free. "I'm done, Lisa. They're sending me to some desk job in the archives. I'll be sorting old files while you're out there fighting." Lisa stood up and faced him directly. "Listen to me. You think differently than everyone else. That's not a weakness. Someday that's going to matter." Jake wanted to believe her, but he couldn't. As he walked away from the recruitment center, he looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, ships were fighting and dying. People were giving everything to protect Earth, and Jake would never be part of it. The Archives Division was located in the basement of Earth Defense Force headquarters. It was a massive room filled with old computers, data storage units, and paper files that dated back decades. Jake reported for duty on a Monday morning, wearing a gray uniform instead of the black one that combat personnel wore. His supervisor was an old man named Carl Fletcher. Carl had been working in the archives for 30 years. He showed Jake around the facility with the enthusiasm of someone describing a morgue. "This is where we keep all the battle records," Carl said, pointing to rows of servers. "Every engagement with the Krell, every tactical report, every intelligence briefing. It all ends up here eventually. Does anyone ever look at this stuff?" Jake asked. Carl laughed. "Not really. The brass thinks they know everything they need to know. They're too busy fighting the war to study it." He handed Jake a tablet. "Your job is to organize these files. Make sure everything is properly cataloged and update the database." Exciting stuff, right? It wasn't exciting. It was mind-numbing. Jake spent his days sorting through battle reports, reading about defeats and victories that no one cared about anymore. The war had been going on for so long that the early battles felt like ancient history. The current commanders had their own strategies, their own technologies. Why would they care about what happened 10 or 15 years ago? But Jake found himself reading the reports anyway. He couldn't help it. Each battle told a story, and he started to see patterns. The Krell always attacked in similar formations. They used the same tactical responses to the same human strategies. It was like they were following a script. Jake started making notes. He created his own database, tracking Krell tactics across hundreds of battles. The more he studied, the more obvious it became. The Krell weren't adapting. They were using the same playbook they had used for 2 decades. Humans kept trying new strategies, but the Krell responses were predictable. He wrote a report and sent it up the chain of command. Then he waited. A week passed, then 2. No response. Jake sent another report with more detailed analysis. Still nothing. He tried a 3rd time. this time sending it directly to the Tactical Planning Division. The response came back quickly. Thank you for your input. We have analysts who handle tactical assessment. Please focus on your assigned duties. Jake felt like he had been slapped in the face. He had found something important, he was sure of it. But no one wanted to hear it from a rejected pilot working in a basement. Months passed. Jake kept working, kept studying, kept finding patterns. He built up a massive collection of data that proved his theory. The Krell were predictable. If someone would just listen, Earth could turn that predictability into an advantage. Then one day, Admiral Frank Hudson walked into the archives. Hudson was a legend in the Earth Defense Force. He had commanded fleets, won major battles, and was considered one of the greatest military minds of his generation. But he had also lost badly at the Battle of Proxima. 60 ships under his command had been destroyed. The military had quietly pushed him into retirement. Hudson looked old and tired as he approached Carl's desk. I need to see the files from Proxima. Everything you have. Carl pointed toward the storage section. Help yourself, Admiral. Morrison here can assist you if you need anything. Hudson looked at Jake with sharp eyes. Morrison? Any relation to the Morrison who keeps sending unsolicited tactical reports to command? Jake felt his face turn red. That's me, sir. I apologize if I overstepped. Overstepped? Hudson's expression was hard to read. Son, you're the only person in this entire military who seems to be asking the right questions. Show me what you've got. Jake's heart started pounding. Finally, someone was willing to listen. Admiral Hudson spent 3 hours reviewing Jake's research. He sat at one of the old workstations, reading through reports and data analysis while Jake stood nervously nearby. The Admiral didn't say a word the entire time. He just read, occasionally making notes on a tablet. Finally, Hudson looked up. How long have you been working on this? 8 months, sir, Jake said. Since I was assigned here. And you sent this to tactical planning? Multiple times? Yes, sir. They told me to focus on my assigned duties. Hudson made a sound that might have been a laugh or a grunt. Of course they did. You know what your problem is, Morrison. You're thinking like a strategist in a military that only wants technicians. Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Hudson stood up and looked around the dusty archives. I'm running a small operation at the proving grounds. We test experimental ships and train crews on older vessel types. It's basically a retirement home for old warships and washed-up admirals. He fixed Jake with a hard stare. How would you like to get out of this basement? Sir, I can't pilot modern ships. The neural interface doesn't work for me. I know. That's exactly why I want you. Hudson picked up his tablet. The proving grounds has older ships, frigates from the early war years. They run on manual systems. No neural interface required. If you want to prove your theories, you'll need to do it the hard way. Jake felt hope surge in his chest for the first time in months. When do I start? Tomorrow. Pack your things. And Morrison, don't expect a warm welcome. My crew isn't going to be happy about babysitting someone who couldn't make it through basic pilot certification. Hudson wasn't wrong. When Jake arrived at the proving grounds, the reception was ice cold. The facility was located on a remote moon, far from the main military bases. It consisted of a small command center and a dozen hangar bays containing ships that had seen better days. Commander Pete Sullivan was Hudson's second in command. He was a career officer who had been reassigned to the proving grounds after losing his ship in combat. The moment he saw Jake's file, his expression turned sour. A washout, Sullivan said, not bothering to lower his voice. Sir, with all respect, we're not running a charity here. Morrison is here to test a theory, Hudson replied calmly. Give him the Ranger and let him train. The UES Ranger was a frigate that had been built in the early years of the war. It was small, outdated, and scheduled for decommissioning. Unlike modern ships, it had physical controls, manual targeting systems, and no neural interface. Jake would have to fly it the old-fashioned way, using his hands and eyes instead of his thoughts. The ship smelled like oil and old metal when Jake first climbed aboard. The cockpit was cramped with dozens of switches, buttons, and displays covering every surface. Modern pilots would have found it hopelessly primitive. To Jake, it looked like possibility. He spent 2 weeks just learning the systems. Every evening, he studied the manuals. Every morning, he ran through startup procedures until he could do them with his eyes closed. The Ranger became his classroom and his home. When Hudson finally approved him for a training flight, Jake was ready. He strapped into the pilot's seat, ran through his checklist, and launched the Ranger into the black void of space. For the first time in his life, he was actually flying a warship. It felt incredible. His hands moved across the controls, adjusting thrust and direction. His eyes scanned the displays, tracking speed and position. Everything was manual, everything was direct. He wasn't thinking the ship into motion. He was physically making it move through his own actions. Hudson's voice came through the radio. "How's she handling, Morrison?" "Like a dream, sir," Jake replied, grinning despite himself. "Good, because now comes the hard part." The training exercise began simply enough. Jake had to navigate through an asteroid field while drone fighters tried to shoot him down. The drones were programmed with Krell tactics, simulating how an actual enemy engagement would play out. It was a disaster. The drones moved with computer precision. They anticipated his every move, cut off his escape routes, and hit him with simulated weapons fire within 2 minutes. The exercise ended with Jake's ship marked as destroyed. Back at the command center, Sullivan was waiting with a smug expression. 2 minutes. That might be a new record for shortest survival time. The other officers laughed. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had seen something during that exercise. Something important. "Request permission to review the combat data, sir," he said to Hudson. Granted. Jake spent the next 6 hours analyzing every second of the training flight. He watched the drone movements, studied their response patterns, and timed their reactions. Then he saw it. When he made an unexpected move, there was a delay in the drone response. Just 3 seconds, but it was there. The drones were programmed to predict human behavior. They anticipated moves based on what a neural interface pilot would do. But Jake wasn't using a neural interface. His reactions were different, slower in some ways, but also less predictable. The drones had to process this unexpected behavior, and that processing took time. Jake started developing new flight patterns, maneuvers that made no sense from a tactical standpoint, but exploited the delay in drone responses. He practiced in the simulator for hours each day, perfecting movements that looked crazy but worked. A month later, he requested another live exercise. Sullivan approved it with obvious pleasure, expecting another quick failure. He invited several other officers to watch, probably hoping to enjoy Jake's humiliation. The exercise began. The drones swarmed toward the Ranger, moving in perfect Krell attack formations. Jake didn't try to outrun them or outmaneuver them conventionally. Instead, he flew straight into the middle of their formation, and then did something no sane pilot would attempt. He killed his forward thrust, spun the ship sideways, and fired his engines in a direction that left him tumbling through space. The drones tried to track him, but their targeting computers couldn't predict which way he would move next because his movements were random. While they recalculated, Jake used manual thrusters to steady his spin and fired at the confused drones. For 47 minutes, Jake fought an entire squadron of drones. He used debris for cover in ways that would have destroyed a neural-linked pilot through feedback. He made turns so sharp they would have disoriented anyone connected to the ship's sensors. He fought like a human, not like a computer. When the exercise ended, 3 drones remained functional, but they had failed to destroy the Ranger. Jake had survived nearly 50 times longer than his first attempt. The command center was silent when Jake landed. Sullivan stared at the data screens like they had personally betrayed him. The other officers looked confused, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Admiral Hudson walked up to Jake's ship as he climbed out of the cockpit. The old admiral was smiling, really smiling for the first time since Jake had met him. "You just changed everything, son," Hudson said quietly. "Now we need to convince the rest of the military that you're not crazy." Jake looked back at the Ranger, this old ship that everyone had written off as worthless, just like they had written him off. "How do we do that, sir?" "We show them that different isn't the same as useless. We show them that the old ways still have value. We show them that humanity's strength isn't in becoming more like machines." Hudson clapped Jake on the shoulder. "We show them that you can win." Word of Jake's success spread through military channels faster than anyone expected. Within a week, Admiral Hudson received orders to report to Earth Defense Force headquarters. They wanted an explanation for how a rejected pilot had lasted 47 minutes against programming that usually killed experienced officers in under 5. Jake traveled with Hudson back to Earth. As their transport ship descended through the atmosphere, Jake felt his stomach tighten with nerves. He was about to present his ideas to the people who had rejected him. The same people who had ignored his reports for months. The presentation took place in a conference room filled with admirals and generals. Jake recognized some of them from news broadcasts. Admiral Claire Patterson ran fleet operations for the entire Earth Defense Force. General Marcus Cole commanded the ground forces. These were people who made decisions that affected billions of lives. Hudson introduced Jake and then stepped aside, letting him speak. Jake brought up the combat footage on the main display screen and began his explanation. The Krell fight with incredible efficiency, he started. Their ships work together perfectly. They anticipate our moves and counter them almost instantly. For 20 years, we've been trying to match their speed and coordination by using neural interfaces. We've been trying to think like they do, General Cole interrupted, and that strategy has kept us alive for 2 decades. What's your point? Jake took a breath and continued. My point is that we're playing their game. The Krell expect us to fight like computers because that's what our neural interfaces make us do. We've become predictable. They can anticipate our tactics because those tactics are generated by algorithms and training programs. He played the footage of his training exercise. I can't use a neural interface. I have to fly manually. That means I'm slower at some things, but it also means I'm unpredictable. The Krell programming can't anticipate human intuition and creativity when it's not filtered through a computer system. Admiral Patterson leaned forward. You're suggesting we deliberately handicap our pilots by removing the neural interface? I'm suggesting we give the Krell something they can't predict. Human unpredictability. The ability to make decisions that don't make tactical sense but work anyway. The room erupted in argument. Half the officers thought Jake was insane. The other half thought he was wasting their time. General Cole was particularly vocal in his opposition. This is ridiculous, Cole said loudly. We developed neural interface technology specifically to compete with Krell reaction times. You want us to throw away our only advantage because one pilot got lucky in a training exercise? But Admiral Hudson stood up and silenced the room. Lucky? I've been fighting the Krell for 15 years. I've lost ships, I've lost entire fleets, and I've watched this war turn into a slow defeat. We're losing, people. Our current strategies aren't working. Maybe it's time we tried something different. Patterson called for a vote. The council approved a limited trial. Jake would be given command of a small squadron of older ships and a crew of volunteers. They would run one real combat mission against the Krell. If it succeeded, the program would continue. If it failed, the entire idea would be abandoned. Jake was given 2 weeks to assemble his team. He put out a call for volunteers, pilots who were willing to fly without neural interfaces, who had been rejected for the same reasons he had, or who simply believed in trying a new approach. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of applications came in from across the fleet. People who had been labeled unfit, who had washed out of training, who had something to prove. Jake selected 24 of them for his squadron. His second in command was Lieutenant Amy Foster. She had graduated at the top of her class but had been stuck in low-level positions because she kept questioning her superior officers. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and absolutely fearless. So we're the island of misfit toys, she said when Jake offered her the position. The rejects and the troublemakers. This should be interesting. They trained together for 2 weeks on the older frigates. These ships had been pulled from storage facilities and refurbished for manual operation. They were slow, outdated, and lacked the weapon systems of modern vessels. But they could be flown by human hands and human instincts. Jake taught his pilots the techniques he had developed. How to make random movements that computers couldn't predict. How to use terrain and debris in ways that neural-linked pilots couldn't, because the feedback would be too intense. How to think creatively instead of following programmed responses. The squadron became known as Unit 19. Most of the regular fleet called them the Lost Cause. Sullivan, who had been forced to provide technical support, called them worse things than that. Their first mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence had located a Krell supply depot in the Outer Rim. It was lightly defended, according to the reports. Perfect for a trial run. Unit 19 would jump in, destroy the depot, and jump out. Simple and clean. Jake knew better than to trust intelligence reports. It feels wrong, he told Amy the night before the mission. Too easy. Too convenient. Maybe we're due for some good luck, she replied. But she didn't sound convinced either. Unit 19 launched at dawn. 24 ships in total divided into 6 groups of 4. They jumped through hyperspace and emerged in the target system right on schedule. The supply depot was exactly where intelligence said it would be. So was the Krell battle group waiting for them. "It's a trap," Jake said calmly, even as his heart raced. The scanner showed over 100 Krell warships surrounding the depot. They had known Unit 19 was coming. Somehow they had learned about Earth's experimental squadron and decided to destroy it before it could become a threat. Amy's voice came through the radio, tense but controlled. "Orders, sir?" Jake looked at the tactical display. His 24 ships against over 100 enemy vessels. Conventional wisdom said to retreat immediately, jump back to hyperspace and report the ambush, live to fight another day. But Jake thought about all the people who had said he would never amount to anything. All the officers who thought this whole idea was a waste of time. If he ran now, he would prove them right. Unit 19 would be disbanded and the war would continue as it always had, with Earth slowly losing. "All ships break formation," Jake ordered. "Each group operates independently. Pick your targets and engage at will. Don't coordinate. Don't follow standard tactics. Just fight." "That's insane," someone said over the radio. "Probably," Jake agreed. "But the Krell are expecting us to either run or fight conventionally. Let's give them something they're not ready for. All ships engage." Unit 19 scattered in 6 different directions. The Krell fleet, which had been positioned to fight a coordinated attack, suddenly found itself facing 6 separate battles happening simultaneously. Their battle computers tried to track and respond to all the different threats. But each human group was fighting in a completely different style. One group used the asteroid field near the depot, hiding among the rocks and ambushing Krell ships. Another flew straight at the enemy flagship, firing wildly and forcing the larger vessels to scatter. A third group circled around the back of the Krell formation and attacked their support ships. Jake led his group of 4 frigates against a Krell cruiser that was trying to organize the defensive response. He flew patterns that made no sense, random turns and sudden stops that kept the enemy targeting systems confused. When they got close enough, his group opened fire with everything they had. The battle lasted 8 hours. It was chaos. There was no grand strategy, no coordinated plan, just 24 ships fighting desperately against impossible odds, each one relying on human creativity and unpredictability to survive. Jake lost 2 ships. Good people died and their deaths hit him hard. But Unit 19 destroyed 18 Krell warships and crippled the supply depot. More importantly, they survived when they should have been annihilated. They won when everyone expected them to lose. When the remaining ships jumped back to Earth, Jake sat in his cockpit and stared at his hands. They were shaking. He had just commanded his first real battle, and people had died under his orders. It felt nothing like he had imagined it would. Amy's face appeared on his screen. She looked exhausted. "We did it, Jake. Against all odds, we actually did it." "We lost people," he said quietly. "We did, and we'll honor them. But we also proved something today. We proved that your way works." The footage of the battle spread across every human colony within days. The military analysts couldn't believe what they were seeing. A small squadron of outdated ships had survived against a force 5 times their size. The impossible had happened. Jake Morrison, the pilot who had been labeled useless, had just shown the entire human race that there was another way to fight this war. The success of Unit 19 changed everything. Within 3 months, the Earth Defense Force had established the Independent Strike Division. They pulled older ships out of mothballs, refurbished them for manual operation, and began recruiting pilots who had previously been rejected for neural interface incompatibility. Jake was promoted to commander and given a new ship. The ISD Phantom was built specifically for the new style of warfare. It looked different from modern warships, with more windows in the cockpit and physical control systems throughout. The crew had to actually touch their stations to operate them, like pilots from 100 years ago. But the Phantom was also equipped with the best weapons and shields that Earth could produce. It was fast, heavily armored, and designed to take punishment. The ship represented a combination of old and new human intuition, backed by advanced technology. Jake's core team transferred with him to the Phantom. Amy Foster became his tactical officer. Chief Engineer Danny Wright kept the ship running through a combination of technical skill and what seemed like pure magic. Navigation Officer Kelly Price could calculate jump coordinates in her head faster than most computers. Weapons Officer Greg Murphy had an almost supernatural ability to predict where enemy ships would move. They weren't just a crew. They became a family, the kind of bond that only forms when people trust each other with their lives every single day. The Independent Strike Division grew rapidly. Within 6 months, they had 300 ships operating across human space. The Krell began calling them the Ghost Fleet because they operated without the digital signatures that neural-linked ships produced. They appeared out of nowhere, struck hard, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. But the Krell weren't static enemies. They learned and adapted. After losing several battles to Ghost Fleet tactics, they created special hunter-killer squadrons designed specifically to track down and destroy the manually operated ships. These units were commanded by Krell officers who had proven capable of individual thought beyond the standard hive mind responses. The war became a deadly game of move and counter-move. Jake led raid after raid into Krell territory, striking supply lines and communication hubs. But each mission got harder as the enemy learned to anticipate Ghost Fleet tactics. The Battle of New Harmony changed everything. The colony world was home to 2 million civilians, and intelligence reported that a Krell fleet was moving to invade. Jake led the Phantom and 15 other Ghost Fleet ships to defend the planet. The battle started badly. The Krell had brought one of their new hunter-killer groups, and they were ready for Ghost Fleet tactics. They didn't rely on predictive algorithms. Instead, they fought with individual cunning and coordination that matched human creativity. Jake's forces were outnumbered 3-1. Worse, the Krell positioned themselves between the Ghost Fleet and the civilian evacuation transports. If Jake retreated, 2 million people would be captured or killed. Amy saw the problem immediately. We can't win this straight up. There are too many of them and they're too good. Then we don't fight straight up, Jake replied. He opened a channel to the evacuation coordinator on the planet's surface. How long until the last transport launches? 20 minutes, came the response. But the Krell will intercept them the moment they enter orbit. Jake made his decision. All Ghost Fleet ships form a defensive screen around the evacuation zone. Make them come through us to reach the transports. Amy looked at him with wide eyes. Jake, that's a suicide position. We'll be sitting targets, I know. But those people need time to escape. We're going to buy it for them. The Ghost Fleet ships moved into position, creating a wall between the Krell and the planet. The enemy fleet advanced, confident in their superior numbers. The battle that followed was brutal in close range. Ships on both sides were destroyed in the opening minutes. Amy's ship took heavy damage early in the fight. Her engines were failing, her weapons were offline, and the Krell moved in for the kill. She saw the enemy torpedoes launching toward her vessel and knew she had seconds to live. Then she saw the civilian transport rising from the planet below, packed with refugees. The transport was slow and unarmored. If it reached orbit while the Krell fleet was still active, it would be destroyed instantly. Amy made her choice. She used the last of her maneuvering power to position her dying ship between the transport and the Krell torpedoes. The weapons hit her vessel dead center, and the explosion lit up the sky like a small sun. Jake watched it happen on his screens. He saw Amy's ship sacrifice itself to save civilians she had never met. He felt something break inside his chest, but he couldn't stop fighting. Not yet. Not while people still needed him. The evacuation transports made it to safety. All of them. 2 million people escaped New Harmony because the Ghost Fleet held the line long enough, but the cost was heavy. 5 ships destroyed. Amy and 200 other crew members dead. After the battle, Jake found Amy's personal belongings in her quarters on the Phantom. Among them was a set of dog tags and a letter she had written to her family. Jake read the letter once, then carefully packed it away to send to her parents. He kept the dog tags for himself, wearing them alongside his own. The war continued. Victory followed victory, but each one cost lives. Good people died under Jake's command. He started keeping a list of their names, reading it every night before sleep. He owed them that much. He owed them remembrance. The turning point came at a place called the Junction. It was a strategic crossroads where 3 major hyperspace routes intersected. Control of the junction meant control of trade and military movement across an entire sector of space. The Krell committed a massive fleet to capture it. Earth Defense Force Command planned a conventional defense. They would meet the Krell fleet head-on with superior numbers and fight it out. Admiral Hudson presented the plan to Jake during a private meeting. They're sending everything we have to the junction, Hudson explained. Every available ship, every reserve unit. It's going to be the biggest battle of the war. Jake studied the tactical maps. The Krell were bringing over 500 warships to the junction. Earth would match that number, but it would leave the rest of human space virtually undefended, and even with equal numbers, the battle would be a bloodbath that could last for weeks. There has to be another way, Jake said. If there is, I haven't found it. The junction is too important to lose. Jake spent 3 days studying intelligence reports and star charts. He barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. Then he found it. The answer that everyone else had missed. He called an emergency meeting with Admiral Hudson and Admiral Patterson. What he proposed was so radical that both admirals initially thought he was joking. "You want to abandon the junction?" Patterson said slowly, without firing a shot. "Yes, ma'am. We let the Krell take it." While their entire fleet is focused on occupying the junction, the Ghost Fleet strikes deep into their territory. We hit 3 major shipyards simultaneously. We destroy their ability to build new vessels. Hudson frowned. That violates every principle of defensive warfare. We'd be giving up strategic territory. Strategic territory that costs us nothing if the enemy can't hold it. Jake countered. The Krell are committing their entire fleet to this operation. Their shipyards will be virtually undefended. We take them out, and suddenly that fleet at the junction is stranded. No supplies, no reinforcements, no way to replace losses. General Cole, who had been listening via video link, exploded. "This is insane. You're gambling the entire war on a theory." "I'm gambling the entire war on the Krell being predictable," Jake replied, "which they always have been. They commit to an objective and pursue it regardless of changing circumstances. It's their biggest weakness." The debate lasted for hours. In the end, Admiral Hudson made the deciding argument. "We're losing this war slowly. Conventional tactics are leading us toward inevitable defeat. Morrison's approach has worked every time we've tried it. I say we give him this chance." Admiral Patterson authorized Operation Broken Mirror. While the conventional fleet made a show of defending the junction, the Ghost Fleet would jump deep into Krell space and hit 3 critical shipyards. It was the biggest coordinated strike that the Independent Strike Division had ever attempted. Jake led 300 ships divided into 3 attack groups. He commanded the strike on Shipyard Alpha, the largest Krell construction facility. The jump into enemy territory was terrifying. They were going deeper than any human force had ever ventured, into the heart of Krell-controlled space. When they emerged from hyperspace, the shipyard was exactly where intelligence said it would be. And it was almost completely undefended. The Krell had pulled nearly everything to the junction. The attack lasted 6 hours. The Ghost Fleet ships tore through the minimal defenses and systematically destroyed every construction dock, every supply depot, every vessel under construction. By the time Krell reinforcements arrived, Shipyard Alpha was a field of debris. The other 2 strike groups reported similar success. All 3 major shipyards were destroyed. The Krell's ability to build new ships had been reduced by 60% in a single operation. At the junction, the Krell fleet found itself in a trap. They had taken the territory as expected, but now they were stranded. Earth's conventional forces hit them from 6 months after the Battle of the Junction. Intelligence officers discovered something that changed everything. Deep in Krell territory, hidden within their home star cluster, the enemy was building a weapon unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They called it the Convergence Device. The briefing took place in the most secure room at Earth Defense Force headquarters. Jake sat at a table with Admiral Hudson, Admiral Patterson, and a dozen other high-ranking officers. The intelligence analyst presenting the information looked terrified. "The device creates a cascading shockwave through hyperspace," the analyst explained. "When activated, it will propagate along the hyperspace routes connecting human colonies. Every star system we occupy will be hit simultaneously." General Cole leaned forward. "What kind of damage are we talking about?" "Total. The shockwave will destabilize stars, cause them to go nova. Every human world will be destroyed within hours of activation." The room fell silent. Jake felt sick to his stomach. The Krell weren't just trying to win the war anymore. They were trying to exterminate humanity completely. "How long until it's operational?" Patterson asked. 6 months. Maybe less. Can we destroy it?" The analyst brought up tactical maps. "The device is located here in the heart of the Krell home cluster. It's protected by the largest fleet we've ever detected, over 2,000 warships plus defensive stations and minefields. A direct assault would require every ship we have, and we'd still likely lose." The War Council debated for 3 days. Some argued for evacuation, trying to move the human population beyond the weapon's range before it activated. Others wanted to surrender and hope for mercy. A few suggested building their own doomsday weapon as a deterrent. Jake listened to all the arguments, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Amy, about all the people who had died fighting this war. They had sacrificed everything to protect humanity. Running away or surrendering felt like betraying their memory. On the third day, he requested permission to speak. The room fell quiet as he stood up. "I want to lead a strike mission to destroy the convergence device," he said simply. General Cole laughed. "With what? Did you not hear the intelligence report? There are 2,000 enemy ships protecting that weapon. We don't have the forces to break through those defenses. I'm not talking about breaking through. I'm talking about sneaking in." Jake brought up his own tactical plan on the display. "We take a single ship, the Phantom. We capture a Krell vessel, use it to infiltrate the home cluster, locate the device, and destroy it from within." Admiral Patterson studied the plan carefully. This would be a one-way mission. Even if you succeeded in destroying the weapon, you'd never make it back out, I know. "Ma'am, you're talking about suicide. I'm talking about doing what needs to be done to save humanity." The room erupted in argument again, but Admiral Hudson silenced everyone with a single gesture. The old admiral looked at Jake with an expression that was hard to read. "You don't have to do this, son," Hudson said quietly. "You've already done more for Earth than anyone could ask. You've proven yourself 100 times over." "That's exactly why I need to do this," Jake replied. "Everyone said I was useless. You showed me I wasn't. Now I need to prove it one final time." The War Council approved the mission. Jake would take the Phantom and a volunteer crew deep into Krell space, while the main fleet created a diversion by attacking the outer defensive perimeter. Jake's team would infiltrate using a captured enemy vessel and destroy the convergence device. Jake handpicked his crew. He only wanted volunteers who fully understood that they weren't coming back. Danny Wright signed up immediately. "You think I'm letting you fly into hell without me keeping your ship running?" the engineer said with a grin that didn't quite hide the fear in his eyes. Kelly Price volunteered next. "Someone needs to navigate through that cluster." "Might as well be me." Greg Murphy was third. "I've been shooting at Krell ships for 3 years. About time I got to shoot something that really matters." 15 others joined them. Good people, brave people, all of them willing to die for a chance to save humanity. Jake made sure each of them understood what they were volunteering for. None of them backed out. The night before the mission, Admiral Hudson met with Jake privately. They stood on an observation deck looking out at the stars. "I'm proud of you," Hudson said. "You know that, right? When I found you in that archive, you were just a kid who everyone had written off. Now you're going to save the human race." "Maybe," Jake replied. "Or maybe I'm going to get 20 good people killed for nothing." That's the burden of command. Second-guessing yourself, wondering if you made the right call. Hudson placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "But I've watched you fight this war. You see things others don't. You think differently. That's always been your strength." The mission began with perfect execution. The Phantom rendezvoused with a Ghost Fleet strike team that had captured a Krell destroyer. Jake's crew transferred to the enemy vessel, using stolen transponder codes and identification protocols to make it appear like a legitimate Krell ship. The captured destroyer limped toward the home cluster, broadcasting distress signals. Krell patrol ships scanned them but accepted their cover story. They were allowed through the outer defensive perimeter. Kelly navigated through sensor nets and patrol routes with incredible precision. She had memorized the Krell defensive patterns from intelligence reports, and she guided the ship through gaps in their coverage with only meters to spare. Danny kept the damaged Krell systems running, despite the fact that they were barely holding together. Every few hours something would fail, and he would patch it back together with improvised repairs and sheer determination. They got deeper into enemy territory than any human had ever ventured. The Krell home cluster was beautiful in a terrifying way. Thousands of ships moved in perfect coordination, protecting worlds that humans had never seen. This was the heart of the enemy empire. The convergence device was located on a massive orbital station above the Krell homeworld. It was enormous, bigger than most human cities, surrounded by defensive platforms and patrol vessels. Getting close to it would be nearly impossible, but Jake had anticipated this. He had hidden 3 other teams on different captured ships, each taking different routes into the cluster. While the Krell focused on one vessel, the others slipped through their defenses. It was the same tactic he had used at his first battle, just on a larger scale. 2 of the backup teams made it to the convergence device. They planted nuclear charges on critical systems and transmitted the detonation codes. The moment the signals went out, the Krell realized what was happening. Alarms blared across every frequency. The Krell home fleet converged on the station, hundreds of ships moving to protect their ultimate weapon. On the Phantom, Jake watched the enemy vessels closing in. Detonation in 60 seconds, Danny reported. We're not going to make it out before the blast. I know, Jake replied calmly. He opened a channel to the other ships in his team. It's been an honor serving with all of you. Then he saw the Krell flagship approaching the station. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Phantom. The ship's commander was broadcasting orders, trying to organize the defense. Jake recognized the transmission patterns. This was the Hierarchant, the supreme leader of the Krell war effort. If the convergence device exploded, it would damage the flagship but probably not destroy it. The Hierarchant would survive and the Krell would eventually rebuild. But if Jake could take out the enemy leadership at the same time as the weapon, he made his decision in a heartbeat. Kelly, plot a ramming course on that flagship. Full thrust. Jake, no, Kelly said. The bombs will destroy the device. We don't have to do this. The Krell need to know they can't win this war. They need to see that humans will sacrifice everything to protect our people. Jake's hands moved across the controls, pushing the Phantom to maximum speed. Besides, we were dead the moment we accepted this mission. Might as well make it count for something. The Phantom accelerated toward the Krell flagship. Enemy weapons fire tore into the ship's hull, but Jake kept flying. Danny routed all remaining power to the shields. Greg fired every weapon they had at the flagship's reactor core, weakening its defenses. In the final seconds, Jake thought about everyone he had lost. Amy and all the others who had died fighting this war. He thought about Lisa, his friend from the recruitment center who had believed in him when no one else did. He thought about Admiral Hudson, who had given him a chance when the whole military had written him off. Tell them I wasn't useless after all, Jake said quietly. The Phantom hit the Krell flagship at full speed. The impact breached the reactor core, creating a chain reaction. At the same moment, the nuclear charges on the convergence device detonated. The combined explosions consumed 50 enemy vessels and destroyed the Krell's ultimate weapon. Jake Morrison died in that explosion, along with his entire crew. But their sacrifice broke the Krell Empire. The Hierarchant was dead. The Doomsday weapon was destroyed, and the enemy fleet was leaderless and confused. Within hours, the Krell began fighting among themselves. Different factions claimed leadership. Old rivalries resurfaced and their unified war effort collapsed. Earth's forces pressed their advantage, winning battle after battle against a disorganized enemy. The war was over, but the scars remained. Earth had survived, but millions had died in the 20-year conflict. Entire colonies had been destroyed. Families had been torn apart. The cost of victory was almost too high to measure. Admiral Frank Hudson stood in his office looking at a wall covered with photographs. Young faces smiled back at him, frozen in moments of happiness before the war took them away. Amy Foster laughing at some joke. Danny Wright covered in grease but grinning proudly. Kelly Price studying a star chart with intense concentration. Greg Murphy showing off a new weapon modification, and in the center of them all, Jake Morrison, the kid from the archives who had changed everything. Hudson had aged 20 years in the past 12 months. He had overseen the final campaigns of the war, accepted the Krell surrender, and begun the long process of rebuilding human civilization. But nothing he did felt as important as what Jake and his crew had accomplished. The memorials started appearing within weeks of the war's end. Families built monuments to the fallen in every city and colony. The largest was constructed in orbit around Earth, a massive station that would serve as both a reminder of the cost of war and a symbol of humanity's resilience. They called it Morrison Point. The dedication ceremony was held on the first anniversary of Jake's death. Thousands attended in person, while billions watched on screens across human space. Hudson had been asked to speak, and he had spent weeks trying to find the right words. He stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. He saw Lisa Bennett, now a captain herself, wearing Jake's dog tags alongside her own. He saw the families of the crew members who had died on the Phantom. He saw young cadets who had been inspired by Jake's story to join the military. Jake Morrison was labeled useless. Hudson began, His voice echoed across the ceremony space. The military looked at his test results and decided he had no value. He couldn't interface with our systems, so he couldn't be a pilot. Case closed. He paused, letting the words sink in. But Jake proved us wrong. Not through anger or bitterness, but through persistence and creativity. He took the limitation that everyone saw as a weakness and turned it into his greatest strength. He showed us that being different wasn't the same as being broken. Hudson gestured to the station being constructed behind him. This place represents more than just a memorial to the fallen. It represents a promise that we will never again dismiss someone simply because they don't fit our expectations, a promise that we will value creativity, individuality, and unconventional thinking. The Independent Strike Division had continued operating after the war ended. The Ghost Fleet had proven too valuable to disband. But its mission had changed. Instead of fighting battles, they now explored unknown space, made first contact with new species, and handled situations that required creative problem-solving. Commander Pete Sullivan, who had once mocked Jake as a charity case, now led one of the Ghost Fleet squadrons. He had learned the hard way that conventional thinking couldn't solve every problem. During a rescue operation in a collapsing star system, Sullivan had used the manual control tactics that Jake had pioneered, saving 200 lives that would have been lost using standard procedures. I was wrong about him, Sullivan admitted during an interview. I thought he was weak because he was different. It took me too long to realize that his differences made him stronger. The education system changed too. The military academies stopped focusing exclusively on neural interface compatibility. They started looking for diverse thinking styles, unconventional approaches, and creative problem-solving. The recruitment centers that had rejected Jake now actively sought out people who thought differently. Lisa Bennett became an instructor at the academy, teaching a course on unconventional tactics. She used Jake's battles as case studies, showing students how creativity and unpredictability could overcome superior force. Her classroom was always full, and her students hung on every word. Admiral Morrison taught us that the impossible is just the difficult waiting for someone brave enough to try, she would tell her classes. He showed us that limitations can be advantages if you're willing to see them differently. The Krell survivors learned their own lessons from the war. Their empire fragmented into dozens of smaller nations, each pursuing their own path. Some remained hostile to humanity, but most sought peaceful relations. They had learned the hard way that humans were dangerous when backed into a corner. A Krell diplomat named Vrex attended the Morrison Point dedication ceremony. He had been a junior officer during the war, serving on one of the ships that had fought against Jake's squadron at New Harmony. Now he represented one of the Krell peace factions. We underestimated your species, Vrex said during a private conversation with Hudson. We saw your neural technology and thought you were trying to become like us. We prepared for that. But Morrison showed us that humanity's true strength was your capacity for unpredictable, individual thought. We had no counter for that. Hudson nodded. Jake would have appreciated the irony. He couldn't use the technology that made us more like you, so he fell back on the thing that made us most human. The station was completed 5 years after Jake's death. It was beautiful, a gleaming structure that served as a hub for trade, diplomacy, and research. But it was also a school, training the next generation of Ghost Fleet pilots and commanders. The main hall contained a massive monument. Bronze statues of Jake and his crew stood in a circle looking outward toward the stars. Around the base were inscribed the names of everyone who had died serving in the Ghost Fleet during the war. Thousands of names, each representing a life given for humanity's survival, but the inscription that drew the most attention was carved into the floor in letters 3 feet high. They called him useless. He called himself unstoppable. History proved him right. Hudson visited the monument regularly. He was in his 90s now, one of the last surviving senior officers from the war. His hair was white, his hands shook slightly, but his mind remained sharp. He would sit on a bench near the statues, remembering. Young people would sometimes approach him asking about the war. Hudson would tell them stories, but he always emphasized the same themes. That value comes in many forms, that differences should be celebrated, not dismissed, that the people society overlooks might be exactly the ones who change the world. One day, a teenage girl approached him. She was nervous, clutching a datapad to her chest. Admiral Hudson? She asked quietly. I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask you something. No bother at all, Hudson replied with a warm smile. What's on your mind? I was just rejected from the pilot program. Neural interface incompatibility. She looked down at her feet. They told me I could work in administration or support services. But I wanted to fly. Hudson felt his heart ache. This same conversation had happened thousands of times over the years. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Torres. Well, Sarah Torres, let me tell you about a young man I once met. He had the same problem you do. Couldn't interface with the systems. Everyone told him he was useless. Hudson gestured to the statue of Jake Morrison. That young man saved the entire human species. Sarah looked up at the statue with wide eyes. Really? Really? And you want to know the secret? Hudson leaned forward conspiratorially. He didn't save us despite being different. He saved us because he was different. His brain didn't work like everyone else's, so he saw solutions that no one else could see. So what do? You find another way. The Ghost Fleet still operates, and they're always looking for pilots who can think creatively. But more importantly, you remember that the military's opinion doesn't define your worth. You define that yourself. Sarah left looking more hopeful than when she had arrived. Hudson watched her go, wondering if she might be the next person to change everything. The universe had a way of surprising people who were paying attention. Admiral Hudson died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 93. His funeral was attended by thousands, including dozens of Ghost Fleet commanders who credited him with giving them their careers. He was buried with full military honors, his coffin draped with Earth's flag. But the most meaningful tribute came from an unexpected source. The Krell peace faction sent a delegation to the funeral led by Vrex. They presented a gift, a star chart showing a newly discovered system in neutral space. The Krell were naming it Hudson Morrison, in honor of the 2 humans who had ended the war. Admiral Hudson gave Morrison a chance when your society had rejected him, Vrex explained. In doing so, he changed the course of the war and saved countless lives on both sides. This small gesture cannot repay that debt, but we hope it honors his memory. The years passed. The generation that had fought the war grew old and died, replaced by young people who knew the conflict only from history books. But the lessons endured. Morrison Point became one of the most prestigious institutions in human space, producing diplomats, explorers, and commanders who approached problems with creativity and open minds. The Ghost Fleet evolved into something Jake had never imagined. They became humanity's first responders, the people called in when situations required unconventional solutions. They rescued stranded ships from dangerous nebulas, negotiated peace between warring colonies, and made first contact with new,